the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow strait with Iran on one side and Oman on the other, only 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The only maritime gateway connecting Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Iraq to the world's oceans. One of the most critical choke points on Earth, a vital artery of maritime trade, carrying 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas and 25% of all seaborne oil. And now, following the United States and Israel's strikes on Iran, a geopolitical flashpoint that Iran has largely shut down, sending shockwaves through the global economy. So today, let's take a look at why this strait matters so much and the geological and geopolitical history that made it this way. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the southeastern end of the Gulf, called the Persian Gulf by Iranians and the Arab Gulf by Arabs, squeezed between two land masses that fit together like puzzle pieces. A strait, by definition, is a narrow passage where two seas or oceans meet, with land closing in on both sides without quite touching. Because maritime trade slows dramatically in these passages and naval maneuverability becomes severely restricted, straits are known in geopolitics as choke points. Strategic bottlenecks where enormous power can be projected with minimal force. And that is precisely what makes the Strait of Hormuz so strategically valuable to Iran. We'll get to that. That's great. But first, we need to understand the geology that shaped this region, because the root cause of almost everything happening here today, the oil, the wars, the struggle for control over the strait, is geology. The driving force behind that geology is the northward movement of the Arabian Plate. You can see this for yourself by opening a seismic map and turning on the tectonic plates layer. The Arabian Plate moves approximately 47 millimeters to the northeast every year. This movement simultaneously squeezes many countries in the region between itself and the Eurasian Plate, pulling them into active earthquake zones and pushing up mountain ranges, while also colliding directly with the Eurasian Plate further to the east, causing the collision zone to deform dramatically. And what a deformation it is! You can see this with your own eyes simply by opening Google Maps. If we clean up that image a little, here's what we get. The body of water at the bottom is the Persian Gulf. The large island on the right is Keshem Island, which we'll come back to shortly. And those jagged ridges across the land, those are the Zagros Mountains. Just like the hood of a car crumples and buckles in a zigzag pattern during a collision, the Earth's crust is exactly the same thing when two tectonic plates crash into each other, folding and warping to create these mountains. Remarkable, isn't it? But that's not all. Because these mountains push the Arabian Plate downward, they create what geologists call a sedimentary basin, a sunken hollow region in the Earth's crust. And these basins are extraordinarily good at trapping hydrocarbons like oil. In fact, a significant portion of the Middle East's oil is a direct result of these tectonic movements. The body of water we call the Persian Gulf, or the Arab Gulf, is itself a gulf formed over thousands of years as this basin gradually filled with water. And it doesn't stop there. The Strait of Hormuz itself is also a product of the very same geology. Much of Oman, which controls the southern side of the strait, is made up of what geologists call the seamale ophiolite, essentially oceanic crust that has been pushed to the surface. But Oman isn't an ocean, you might say. And you'd be right. That's exactly the point. One of the many things that happened as the Arabian Plate collided with the Eurasian Plate was that this oceanic crust was thrust upward, eventually forming what is today the territory of Oman. And the geology here is genuinely fascinating, because the massive hard rocks that form the Muzandam Peninsula, the Omani side of the Strait of Hormuz, acted like a wedge when the Arabian Plate pushed them toward the Zagros Mountains, bending the opposite coastline into a shape that mirrors their own. This is what created the strait's remarkably narrow and winding form, and it's precisely why the two sides of the strait look like they were made to fit together. Had the Zagros Mountains failed to absorb that collision, or had the Muzandam Peninsula been made of less resistant rock, tectonic forces would likely have closed off both the strait and the Gulf entirely tens of thousands of years ago. And many of today's conflicts might never have emerged at all. But that's not what happened. The Strait of Hormuz formed, and its importance was recognized long before modern Iran ever existed, because long before the world's greatest oil tankers began passing through these waters, the Strait of Hormuz was already seen by the rulers of trade as a critical chokepoint, one that had to be held at all costs. In the 11th century, as the Abbasid and Buyid empires collapsed, a man named Muhammad Diramku, exiled from Oman, used Omani maritime soldiers to build a trading port on the Persian mainland at a place called Mustana. He named this coastal settlement the Kingdom of Hormuz. Why he chose that name isn't entirely clear. The most likely explanation is that it derives from Hormozd, the Middle Persian name for Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom in Zoroastrianism. Another hypothesis suggests it comes from the Persian word Hermog, meaning the place of dates. There are other etymological theories as well, but whatever the reason, Diramku's Kingdom of Hormuz grew into a remarkably powerful force that would shape the region for centuries to come. The port of Hormuz played a crucial role in the power struggles that followed, caught between various local dynasties and the Selgourids, a branch of the Oghuz Turks. Conquering Hormuz was no easy feat. Part of the region's strength came from its brutally unforgiving climate, and perhaps no one captured this better than the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who passed through the area in the 1270s. He wrote that the local people survived on little more than dates, salted fish, and a harsh wine made from dates, and that to escape the suffocating heat, they would wade into the Gulf up to their necks and wait there until nightfall. There is even a local legend claiming that when enemy armies once advanced to seize the coastal city, scorching thermal winds swept around them, choking and burning them to death before they could ever reach the city gates. Every culture has its share of battle legends. But the true rise of the Kingdom of Hormuz came with a new generation of rulers in the 14th century. Among them was Ayaz Saifi, a man who had once been a slave and had risen to power, and who made a remarkably shrewd move upon foreseeing that the descendants of Genghis Khan would soon sweep through Persian lands. In 1296, he relocated the coastal population to Jarun Island, what would later become known as Hormuz Island. This was one of 8 islands in the Strait of Hormuz, and these islands were among the most critical components of Hormuz's strategic importance. Keshem Island, the largest of them, served as a watchtower controlling the movement of ships through the strait. Beyond that, the region contained several other islands known today as Hengam, Abu Musa, Larak, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb. One glance at a map makes it immediately clear that whoever controls these islands directly controls the flow of maritime traffic through the strait. And today, although the United Arab Emirates claims 2 of them as its own, all of these islands are effectively under Iranian control. But long before Iran, there was the Kingdom of Hormuz, now centered on the island. And life on the island was far harsher than anything on the mainland. There was no fresh water. Vegetation was virtually non-existent. Summers were brutally hot. Most of the water and supplies had to be brought in from outside. But defending an island against the Mongols was far easier than defending a coastal city. And indeed, thanks to this strategic move, the island began to flourish rapidly, first taking the name New Hormuz, then transforming by the mid-1300s, particularly during its second golden age, into a magnificent center of trade. The economic model of Hormuz Island was remarkably simple. Merchants passing through the region by sea or land from distant lands were taxed at around 5 to 10%. And in return, they were guaranteed absolute military protection. The model worked brilliantly. The island's markets filled almost overnight with Arabian horses, Yemeni spices, Chinese porcelain, Bengali velvets, and Bahraini pearls. By the 15th century, it had grown into one of the wealthiest ports on earth, a crossroads where trade networks stretching from Egypt to Syria, from Anatolia to inner Iran, from Turkestan to China, Java, Bengal, Gujarat, Aden, and East Africa all converged. The island's population was a mosaic of Sunni and Shia Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Hindus, and Buddhists, all living side by side in harmony, united by the common language of commerce. Ma Huan, who visited the island alongside the Chinese explorer Zheng He in the 15th century, wrote that he was genuinely astonished by the material and spiritual richness of the people of Hormuz. All good things must end. For the Kingdom of Hormuz, that end began in 1507, when the imperialist Portuguese commander Afonso de Albuquerque laid siege to the island. When the young ruler Saif al-Din refused to submit, Europe's powerful cannons obliterated the Kingdom of Hormuz's fleet, built from coconut fiber, and brought the island to its knees in short order. Although a dispute among Albuquerque's captains delayed his full consolidation of control until 1515, he ultimately subjected the island to complete tribute and finished construction of the star-shaped fortress that had been begun at the island's northern tip. From that point on, the rulers of Hormuz became little more than puppets of the Portuguese crown. Stripped of its revenue and all independence, the kingdom entered a slow and painful decline. Weakened further by succession disputes and political infighting, the final blow came in 1622, delivered by the forces of the Safavid ruler Shah Abbas, acting in cooperation with the British East India Company. Fearing that the island might reclaim its independence, the Safavids redirected regional trade to the mainland territory under their own control, a place called Gamru, which would later take the name Bandar Abbas. And just like that, the island was reduced to a dead commercial zone, smelling of nothing but salt and rust. In the centuries that followed, the Strait of Hormuz remained a fragmented region, rarely under the firm control of any single power. But that changed once again in 1820, when the British Empire seized control of the area. Although the British left the Qajar dynasty in place to the north, and the Arab sheikdoms and Oman to the south, they largely maintained security over the strait single-handedly until 1971. During this period, Iranian influence over the strait was virtually non-existent, with most of the control resting in Arab hands channeled through the British. Hormuz's return to Iranian hands came through 20th century bathymetry, the study of ocean floor depths, and petrochemicals. In 1967, Iran began revitalizing the region by constructing a deep-sea port at Bandar Abbas. Shortly after, the complete British withdrawal from the region created a power vacuum in the Gulf. The Shah of Iran seized this opportunity, expanding his naval and air force presence along the Gulf coastline and seizing the islands of Abu Musa and the Tums in 1971. Then in 1972, responding to the Sultan of Oman's call for help against communist insurgents, Iran sent troops to Oman, further consolidating its dominance over the region. This was an absolutely critical move, because as I mentioned at the outset, the Strait of Hormuz stretches 167 kilometers in length, but its width ranges from just 39 to 97 kilometers. And the number that truly matters here is that 39 kilometers, which translates to only 21 nautical miles. Anyone with an understanding of geopolitics will immediately grasp the significance of that number. Under international law, a country's territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from its coastline. 12 nautical miles on one side of the strait belong to Iran. 12 nautical miles on the other side belong to Oman. That means at the strait's narrowest point, the territorial waters of two nations overlap, a constant source of tension and conflict. And to make things more complicated, the strait's floor is remarkably shallow. For the world's giant oil tankers to pass through, they need dozens of meters of water between their hulls and the seabed. The Iranian side of the strait falls below that critical depth threshold. The Omani side, however, is considerably deeper, reaching over 200 meters at its deepest point, which means that not all of those 39 kilometers are actually navigable for ship traffic. The International Maritime Organization allows only 6 nautical miles, roughly 11 kilometers, of the strait to be used for safe passage. 2 nautical miles for inbound traffic, 2 for outbound, and a 2 nautical mile separation zone in between. And almost all of that 11 kilometers falls within Omani territorial waters. Yet, despite this, the geopolitical advantage tilts heavily in Iran's favor. The northern side of the strait is extremely arid and brutally hot, particularly in summer. And as we just saw, this is a profoundly mountainous region. rugged terrain that offers tremendous military advantages for concealing coastal defense systems. More importantly, nearly all of the islands in the strait are under Iranian control. The military installations on these islands give Iran the ability to project enormous pressure over the entire strait. And under these remarkable conditions, the volume of oil flowing through this strait is staggering. Every day, dozens, sometimes hundreds, of vessels carry approximately 15 million barrels of crude oil, 5 million barrels of petroleum products, and over 300 billion liters of natural gas to the rest of the world, particularly to China and Asia. In short, controlling this strait means controlling the jugular vein of global oil trade. And the struggle among modern states to seize that control effectively begins in 1979. The Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 toppled the Pahlavi dynasty, which had maintained relatively more stable relations with the West, dismantled the Iranian Empire, and gave rise to the Islamic Republic of Iran. This would prove to be the first domino to fall in a long chain of consequences. Just 1 year later, Iraq invaded Iran, launching what would become an 8-year conflict known as the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein's goal was twofold: to proactively prevent the Shia-based state ideology brought to power by Khomeini from spreading into Sunni-ruled Iraq, and to neutralize Iran, one of the most powerful forces in the region. The problem was this: invading Iran is extraordinarily difficult, given its intensely mountainous, hot, and arid geography and its formidable military. We are talking about a land that throughout history, only a handful of commanders, Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan among the rare exceptions, ever managed to conquer. And so the conventional trench warfare Iraq initiated quickly ground to a stalemate. This pushed Saddam Hussein toward increasingly brutal methods, including the use of chemical weapons. One of those methods was his decision in early 1984 to attack oil terminals and tankers at Iran's Karg Island. Iraq itself had little need for seaborne oil thanks to its pipeline network, but its allied neighbors did. Aware of this, Khomeini retaliated by attacking those same oil tankers himself, escalating the conflict into what history would come to know as the Tanker War. Over the course of that war, 411 ships were bombed, 239 of them oil tankers. More than 400 sailors lost their lives. Approximately 23% of the stricken tankers either sank or were permanently put out of service. The disruption to oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz sent global oil prices surging almost overnight. For Iran, this was a profound revelation. If it chose to, it could easily shake the global economy simply by threatening oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. This would prove to be an extraordinarily powerful tool for keeping America, which the Islamic Republic considered its arch-enemy, in check. But at the same time, this strategy was nothing short of poking a stick into a hornet's nest. As the tanker war began targeting vessels supplying America and its allies, the global powers that had long been circling the Middle East like vultures were swiftly drawn into the conflict. America, the first name that comes to mind whenever oil is at stake, began escorting Kuwaiti tankers through the Strait of Hormuz under Operation Earnest Will. It was an extraordinarily dangerous game being played in mined waters. And on April 14th, 1988, that mine literally exploded. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a guided missile frigate, struck an Iranian mine during a routine mission. The powerful blast left the ship severely damaged and 10 sailors critically wounded. The ship didn't sink, but America's response was military, not diplomatic. Just 4 days after the incident, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis, striking 2 Iranian intelligence platforms within hours, sinking the frigate Sahand and the missile boat Joshin, putting the frigate Sabalan permanently out of action and destroying numerous attack boats. Nearly half of Iran's naval force had been neutralized within 24 hours. The months that followed were lived on a knife's edge. Military activity in the region was intense. Although both sides were searching for a diplomatic solution, tensions between Iran and America continued to escalate with each passing day. Then, on July 3, 1988, that tension exploded in a horrifying way. The USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, mistaking the civilian aircraft for a warplane. This tragic error cost the lives of 290 civilians. Iran did not retaliate immediately, because the course of the war up to that point had made it abundantly clear just how difficult it was to defeat the American Navy through conventional means. Iran therefore shifted to a new decentralized defense model it called mosaic defense, a fragmented, multi-layered approach built on the principle that even if Iran's central command were eliminated, the country could continue to defend itself. Using missiles and attack boats procured from China and Russia, thousands of Revolutionary Guard soldiers began training for unconventional asymmetric warfare. One of the most critical applications of this doctrine was the capacity to choke off the narrow sea lane of the Strait of Hormuz at will, cutting off a quarter of the world's oil flow at a moment's notice. As increasingly sophisticated reconnaissance, surveillance, missile, and unmanned systems were added to this arsenal over the years, the tension between Iran and America deepened steadily. It had been clear for years that a military breaking point was coming. America was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a powerful Muslim Iran wielding this much influence over the world's oil supply. But more importantly, Iran stood as one of the greatest obstacles to Israel's ambitions in the Middle East. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, had built a political alliance of Shia militant groups he called the Axis of Resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Islamic Resistance and Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. The primary targets of this alliance were America and Israel. Over the past 30 years, Iran had repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, each time using a different justification. Meanwhile, it had also been pursuing uranium enrichment activities that kept the international community on edge. Iran's stated goal was the development of civilian nuclear power technology. But according to Israel, and particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, who had been repeating this claim for decades, Iran was on the verge of obtaining uranium enriched to a level suitable for use in an atomic bomb. Finally, seizing the first opportunity that domestic political conditions in both countries allowed, America and Israel launched a comprehensive airstrike on Iran's nuclear facilities in 2025 to 2026, citing Iran's nuclear program as justification. In the weeks that followed, they began conducting direct operations inside Iran, systematically targeting and eliminating its senior leadership one by one. Where this is all heading and how long the mosaic defense can hold remains to be seen. And there we have it. We never wanted to tell the story of the Strait of Hormuz in the middle of an active conflict, but history sometimes forces our hand. And of course, what we've covered here is merely a 25-minute summary of a history that stretches back millions of years, shaped by the geology and geopolitics of this remarkable region. There are many details we've skipped over, and many topics open to debate. But we hope this has provided a useful framework for understanding what is happening and why. As you can see, the events unfolding in Iran are being met with deeply conflicted reactions, both inside Iran and around the world. On one hand, a significant portion of Iranians appear relieved to see a repressive regime finally being challenged. On the other, the fact that this upheaval is coming as the result of foreign intervention, and that countries subjected to similar interventions throughout history have often been plunged into far darker periods, is being met with deep anxiety across the region. It is also worth noting that Iran's right to defend its own territory and sovereignty is unambiguous under international law, and the defensive capacity it has demonstrated so far makes clear that it will not be an easy target. The critical question for our purposes is this: can control of the Strait of Hormuz actually be wrested from Iran? Anything is possible, but let's be clear, keeping the Strait of Hormuz open through American and Israeli forces alone, let alone through naval power alone while simultaneously protecting every passing tanker, is an extraordinarily difficult operational challenge. The reason? All of the geographical, geological, historical, and geopolitical factors we have discussed throughout this video. An enormous volume of ship traffic must pass through the strait, slowly. Most of these vessels are too cumbersome to defend themselves, and Iran has a vast number of positions from which to strike these ships remotely. a vast arsenal of missiles, and a vast fleet of unmanned systems. Neutralizing all of them effectively would be extraordinarily costly and quite possibly impossible. It therefore seems, unfortunately, very likely that even an administration that came to power promising to end endless wars is now drifting toward yet another one. And if NATO becomes drawn into this conflict, the burden on alliance members will inevitably grow heavier. We have a reasonable sense of how the geology of this region will continue to unfold. But where the geopolitics goes from here, that we will all have to watch together. If you like this video, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing. See you in the next one. Take care.